There is a lot of news to get through, and you've been gathering news tidbits over the last few days, Caro, but we must start with the Lance Collard situation. His charge being upheld. We stand by in the next few days, sometime next week, for the determination of what penalty for another homophobic slur.
Yeah, and we sit here today in the hours that have followed a gather-round regularity, which is the mob breakfast. This is an event put on by senior Indigenous leaders from the AFL, attended by Andrew Dillon, who always speaks. Today, Magic McLean, who is, I think, the ambassador for the Sir Doug Nicholls round. Lee, your former assistant coach.
Yeah, great man. Yeah, great man.
Anyway, he spoke. But it did, the Lance Collard story clouded, to a degree, the mob breakfast. And it's clouded what is going on at the moment between the AFL and the AFL Players Association. So, in the evidence that took place last week, the Pride Cup CEO, Hayley Conway, basically said on Thursday, Bruce, that this is not the way to deal with homophobia in our community, in the AFL community, in the AFLW community. Suspending a bloke for 10 weeks, which is what Lance Collard is now facing, is not the way to stop homophobia. And it is I think it's a great regret that when the last CBA was achieved by the now gone Paul Marsh and Gillan McLaughlin, I think was still there, maybe Andrew Dillon was just coming in, they agreed to set up a joint venture, really, a committee that looked at ways to improve inclusion in the competition. It focusing on First Nations and the LGBTQI communities. Now, this was an undertaking 2.5 years ago. It still hasn't happened. It should have happened years ago. I gather, and it's been driven now by, I think, from the AFL side, Taran Lee, who's taken over the inclusion job by the departed Tanya Hosh, and Tom Harley, who's just come in. They're setting up this committee. I think there's going to be a couple of CEOs from clubs on it. Brendan Schwab from the AFLPA is going to be on it. It meets for the first time next week with an independent chair. Now, where was this?
So that doesn't fit into the Collard situation.
Well, Collard has sadly become a he said, she said. The board, the appeals, not the appeals board, the tribunal that's listened to Lance's case have basically said they don't believe him. St Kilda are doing all they can to fight for this young Indigenous player who has been accused by not one but two players who've doubled down on their evidence that he said it. He now faces a 10-week suspension because he's a second-time offender.
And the first time he pled guilty immediately.
The second time he signed a stat deck to say he didn't do it, but they don't believe him. It's such an ugly story. And this morning, when all these great players got together, although disappointingly, I don't think the St Kilda Football Club was there because their flights didn't work or something. And I think they probably should have been there with their huge Indigenous presence in the AFL. And I'm not saying they're not doing a good job there, but
no one from not Auntie Katrina Amon wasn't there.
Not sure. Not sure. Look, and other coaches, I know that Simon Goodwin always went, for example. Anyway, I just think it's a real pity that the AFL didn't act on this long ago because we've now got this situation where a young player's career could be over, rightly or wrongly, and we've got the head of the Pride Cup who you think would know her stuff saying this is not the way we're going to fix it anyway.
Well, on her statements, will that have any cut through at headquarters?
Well, it should, but she's given the evidence and they've still found Collard guilty and now they're going to sit and deliberate. Maybe they'll give him a lesser sentence, and St Kilda is certainly working on that, but I just think it's another example of where the AFL was too slow to act on what is a really important issue.
So, in terms of we're talking about on Thursday night, the AFL Tribunal, which is Jeff Gleeson and past players who are on-field offences, but they, I guess, were the only body that was there to hear this kind of case. This lady, was she suggesting?
Hayley Conway.
Hayley Conway. So what was her suggestion of how this kind of thing should be handled?
Well, she's been telling the AFL and the AFL players to sit down with independent chairs, with human rights people, and look at ways to improve inclusion. And I don't know if she actually gave any solutions.
To this issue, yeah.
But what she certainly said was suspending a bloke is not going to work, and we've seen 5 or 6 in the last few years. I mean, when Jeremy Finlayson happened, and that was an incident that happened here at Gather Round 3 years ago, Paul Marsh was really strong, the then boss of the players, saying we need set suspensions here, we need set penalties, and that was part 2 of the negotiation about the CBA. Well, we still don't have that either. So it does feel a bit all over the place.
Yeah, and the 4 or 5 players that have been suspended for using homophobic slurs, there hasn't been any. There've been a range of penalties. Like Isaac Rankin, well, he got the 4 matches. We've had 5-match penalties. I think Collard's first offence was 6 matches.
Adelaide fought hard for Rankin and had a week taken off his sentence. Now, I just don't. It's not working. It's not improving the situation. And I just think it's a pity that the AFL didn't act on this earlier, because frankly, it's become a semi-regular occurrence, these terrible words that are being used on the footy field.
We'll get to our callers on the Nick Theodosi Prestige Car open line in just a tick. Take us through some of the other news tidbits you've gathered since landing here in Adelaide, with the industry converging on this beautiful city.
Well, the West Australians have been very vocal, and I think we spoke to Simon Garlick on 3AW
last night.
But they are determined to be included in conversations about standalone games. Fremantle, I think, want an extra. They've already got one extra home game in a sense because of the North Melbourne deal. They want another one.
Yep, Garlo was strong on that again last night.
The Gold Coast Suns, they want a neutral game. If they're going to keep playing in Darwin, and I think that they would probably rather, when the deal finishes at the end of this year, just have one game in Darwin. They want a neutral game back on the Gold Coast. So what Gather Round has done is everyone wants a bite of the cherry. No one's going to get another Gather Round. And I reported a few weeks ago that the Sydney Swans and AFL New South Wales are looking at having their own version of Gather Round for women in October. Peter Malinauskas has said, well, you can have a women's get-together, but you're not calling it Gather Round. We own it now.
In the discussions of this, it's one of the things that popped into my mind when Gather Round first started. It gives an extra home game to the Crows and Port Adelaide. So that seems unfair in itself. So in terms of Gather Round, was the thought of, well, you've got to sacrifice one of your showdowns, and they play each other as part of Gather Round. I mean, was that kind of concept
Peter Malinauskas would not hear of that, because they want to maximise attendances and people coming to the games. And why would you waste a showdown on Gather Round? What I reckon we'll see with
That's
this
been
whole
the argument since day one.
But the extra advantage for Gather Round is the 2 Adelaide teams get 2 extra home game, extra home game.
13th game in Adelaide.
But guess what, Lee? A lot of clubs get to play the grand final on their home ground.
Yes.
I tell you what else happened yesterday. Andrew Dillon left for the day, as did Craig Drummond. They left Gather Round and they had to cancel engagements they'd agreed to do to go to Melbourne and meet with the NFL boss,
Roger Goodell,
who was here to talk about what's going to happen in September and how they can, if there is in fact, because there might not be a Melbourne-based final. There wasn't one last year in semi-final week, I don't think, Bruce. If, in fact, there is no final in Melbourne, it will be a different story. But how they can turn this into a carnival of sorts with this Friday morning game.
What the AFL will be hoping there is not the worst case scenario is if there's 2 Melbourne finals semi-final weekend, because how do they actually do it with having to turn the
Well, I think if it's Western Bulldogs, I think Western Bulldogs should fight like stink for Marvel Stadium.
Particularly if it was against, say, Fremantle.
Exactly. Ditto the Geelong Football Club. Fight like stink, even though they've said they're not going to try and get home finals for one at GMHBA or at least at Marvel, but probably GMHBA. But what I think that the takeout from the meeting that I've heard about is that we are just light years behind the NFL and even actually I think behind the NRL in terms of the use of social media, the use of AI and all the new technologies that are coming into the game. And I'm told this is something that really struck Craig Drummond and is something that the AFL will be doing a lot of work on.
Yeah, the NFL people were in Brisbane during the week before they came to Melbourne talking to the rugby league people. So not out of the question, if they're going to have another game in Australia, it might be at the up north.
One more, and I just haven't gone to the people yet to check it, but did one AFL executive speak quite rudely to another AFL executive on the bus coming home from the Thursday night game between Carlton and Adelaide. Did one executive ask everyone else on the bus to maybe give their thoughts on the game? And when another executive started to deliver her thoughts, was put in her place.
Watch this space.
I'll leave it at that.
Gee.
People were quite shocked at the exchange, I'm told.